One chapter does not define a person's whole story. Welcome to our Journey of Recovery series, where we talk with Montanans who have lived experience of trauma, substance use, and struggles with mental health about where they are now. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA, defines recovery as a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. Join us to learn about community members in recovery as they share their story and the steps they are taking to help others on their journey. Well, thank you so much for joining me and doing this interview today. And I just wanted to start off with a quick introduction, if you could.
Yeah, sure. So, Mike McManus, I'm the program manager for Veterans Navigation Network. We're a veteran nonprofit in Billings, Montana. But if we, help veterans nationwide. I mean, primarily Montana and northern Wyoming, but we've helped veterans nationwide. Originally from Miles City, Montana, but I was gone for 33 years, coming back to visit family and that kind of thing. But retired from the Air Force, worked in the private sector for a little bit. Was very fortunate enough to find my calling, which was as a county veteran service officer in California for Ventura County, California. We had 40,000 veterans and about another 10,000 active duty guard and reserve, and it was basically helping all of them and their families, get connected with federal benefits, state benefits, but a lot of local nonprofit, faith-based, that kind of thing. So anyways, very fortunate there. But in August of 2020, right in the middle, or June of 2020, right in the middle of the world, going crazy, moved here with my California wife. So she's still getting used to Montana. But took 18 months off, needed a break. But I got involved with organizations like Dog Tech Buddies, so they do psych service dogs for veterans, horses, spirits healing, great equine therapy in the Billings area. But then was fortunate enough to get hooked up with Blake Furman, who's the founder, an executive director for Veterans Navigation Network, and I've been working for VNN for the last 4 years. So
Wow.
that's kind of me in a nutshell.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, I was going to say veteran services is it's near and dear to my heart. I have an older brother who
Yeah.
was 82nd Airborne, and then he went directly into the National Guard when he got out after he was stop lost in Afghanistan. So, and he was in Iraq for the first elections. And yeah, he's got a lot of stories, but it's taken a long time for him to open up about them.
Yep. Yeah, that's fairly, typical. And, as far as like not, necessarily talking to or, telling his story, if you will. I mean, I spent 19 months in Korea, which was a long time, pretty real, but nothing like Yugoslavia, which was back in 99. And just doing some site surveys and looking at where we could put people and planes and things like that. Some were in some really nice locations and some were in not nice locations at all.
Yeah.
Then, of course, when the war started, and I mean, just yeah, some pretty horrendous stuff. And then Kuwait and Iraq, in wow, '02 and then '03. So, yeah, I get where he's coming from, and that's who we work with on a daily basis as veterans, and certainly service members. And being in Montana, it's primarily some Air Guard, but a lot of Army Guard,
Yeah.
and but the family members as well. So yeah, we keep pretty busy.
I'm sure you do. Yeah, absolutely. When you meet new people, I think it's probably different, a little bit different when you're like a military service person. And I know that there's been a sordid history with coming back from different wars and conflicts,
Mhm, mhm.
with how people in the United States like react or the public react, basically.
Sure.
So what kind of reactions do you get when you tell them about your history or your experiences?
Yeah, I mean, and you're right, it is very interesting. You listen to I mean, my dad is Vietnam
Yeah.
era. He didn't serve in Vietnam, but he served in the army and whatnot and came back and he was landing in well, first San Francisco. Of course they told him don't wear your uniform and stuff like that. And he said,
Yeah.
well, wrong. He wore his uniform. And he says He didn't really experience any issues there because they kept, everyone kind of, the GIs that were coming back separate from everyone else as much as they could. And when he came into Montana, he said there were no issues. So I think it's,
That's great.
just certain locations in the US, probably the same ones that or maybe a little less patriotic even today, but that's,
Yeah.
neither here nor there. But I think really, we've come a long way after the Gulf War. Had the big parade, when everything was done back in 91. And I think that's when things started to change. Uh, in some ways for the better, in some ways, not quite so much because you figure, gone were the days of the huge standing armies, just
Yeah.
in general. I mean, we reduced a lot of our troop strength. Certainly no more, drafts and things like that. So I think the American, public appreciates and respects the military, by and large. But I think they don't necessarily understand what that means, because now basically, for the last 25 years, it's definitely been that all volunteer force of 4 million-ish people that have just
Hmm.
been deployed again and again and again. And I think we're just, really coming to understand what that actually means. And even though people are, appreciative of the service. You get busy with your own life
Yeah.
and the dog to the vet and the kids to school and the car to oil change and things like that. And you really don't necessarily take time to consider it. Unless you have any skin in the game, like yourself, where you've got a family member who had served in the military. Um, and I always view, Memorial Day as kind of that, gauge on just that public sentiment. And I mean, for decades now, it's really been about the 3-day weekend and the barbecues, and not about the true meaning of, Memorial Day. I mean, I really think it should be on a Wednesday, during the
Yeah.
school year. And, the schools are let out and they attend, the different memorials and different things like that. I think to really, um, bring home the point that, hey, this is the real meaning behind Memorial Day and things like that. Um, and some people will even say, Happy Memorial Day. And I mean, I try to remember the sentiment behind it.
Yeah.
There's nothing happy about Memorial Day. Anyone who's in the service, many people who are, in the service, lost someone or many someones. So yeah, not exactly a happy day. It's nice that most of America can, celebrate with, um, baseball games and barbecues, and that's great because that's what, the military is there to guarantee is that, life goes on back on the home front kind of a thing.
Right.
Um, but it would just, it would be interesting or maybe, if the American public knew what actually was, goes into serving in the military, whether it's as the member or as a child, and certainly as a spouse supporting that military member.
Yeah. My brother has a memorial bracelet he wears that has the names of the fallen from
Yeah,
us. Yeah, from his group when he was over
yeah,
in
for sure.
Afghanistan. Yeah. So,
Uh,
and I know he posts their military photos every year, and I try to share it too, kind of like you
mhm.
were saying, like show people what it really is.
Yeah.
That's like,
Well,
this is his day for that. Yeah.
oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, Armed Forces Day, hey, go up and thank a member for serving, or Veterans Day, sure, you betcha. But yeah, Memorial Day, just a little different story. Although I do have to admit, this year, we had a great group here, locally in Billings. Well, actually, it was the Billings Rotary, but Ken Callahan and his, Hoodies for Heroes, and they say we're going to have a Memorial Day parade. And I was like, a parade on Memorial Day. But the more I came to kind of, I mean, the community, it turned out amazingly, and they dedicated this wonderful monument and things like that, to our, Iraq and Afghan, killed in action. But it was kind of almost, I mean, that celebration of life type of a thing.
Yeah.
That even though, yes, I mean, we miss them, and certainly, their families certainly do, but really, we read their names, we remember them, and by doing so, they're not really gone, if you
Right.
will. You die once when you physically pass. You die a second time when maybe the memory starts to fade. But when people no longer can recall your name, you're
Yeah.
truly dead. And that's not the case at all with certainly in Billings, reading the names of the 38, 39 that were killed in Iraq, Afghanistan. And as long as we remember their names, they live on. So it was actually a very poignant and very meaningful um, Memorial Day parade, and who would have thunk?
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that's great.
Mhm. Yeah, it was very good, and of course, afterwards, yes, the free baseball game and everything else, you've got all that, but yeah, I think it definitely meant a lot to everyone that attended, especially those families. Yeah, it was pretty
Yeah.
cool.
So you said that you were in the military for a long time, and you came back and kind of found your place. Were there any recovery services that you used when you first got out of the military that really impacted you?
Well, I retired in 1987. I came in 1987, retired in May of 2007. But even that, you think about, I was like, oh my gosh, it's been a while.
Yeah.
It's interesting because it's military culture. You don't seek help
Yeah.
for any number of reasons. And it was weird because even though from 2010 through 2020, I was a county veteran service officer, and I'm referring veterans to the vet center, to VA healthcare or other, behavioral health related providers, equine therapy, all of this kind of stuff. Hey, you need to do this, and then we'll kind of, the other part of that is, hey, we're going to get you compensation for that PTSD or that
Yeah.
TBI, as well as all the physical stuff. And yet I'm not doing it myself. And I mean, when I had come, I mean, I had, the Dear John letter during, uh, was it May of '03, kind of a thing. So, all right, that sucks. Came back, got divorced, that kind of thing. PCS or changed, moved permanent bases, went from Hill Air Force Base in Utah to Port Hueneme. It's a Navy base in Ventura, California, doing stuff with the Seabees, Navy Seabees, and talking with fellow vets and helping them out and not helping myself, basically. Um, and My future wife, now wife, was like, you need to get your shit together. Or, you know, um, there will be another ex, Mrs. McManus kind of a thing. And so I, eventually, and I knew exactly who to reach out to. And I mean, because
Yeah.
that's who I sent other veterans to, but, um, so yeah, I eventually reached out to the vet center in Ventura, California. And, vet centers are part of the VA, kind of, sorta. They fall within VA healthcare, but they're their own entity. You don't even have to be enrolled in VA healthcare to use them, because really they would. I mean, you could be on active duty and use a vet center. Of course, that's because far too many veterans die by suicide.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, started going to the vet center. Um, Knew everyone at the vet center because we'd seen them work together and that kind of thing. So that was, they're like, you sure, we could do you could see it, we could refer you out to a community
Yeah.
provider, someone you didn't know. I said, heck, what the heck. So, yeah, started going there and seeing my counselor. She was amazing. Would call me on my when it needed to be, but worked through stuff. Didn't allow me to minimize things, because which I think is pretty typical for vets, where they minimize their experience, because someone else had it worse than them, um, which may very well be the case, but you still went with what you went through, and it
Exactly.
most definitely had an impact on you. But yeah, I had to learn where not to minimize the impact on me. Um, But anyway, that's kind of where it started. And there was, certainly talking to, had a really good psychiatrist through the VA. He was Navy, but I didn't hold it against him. He was actually a Navy flight surgeon and Navy reserves. And so he really got the clinical aspect of it, but also the military aspect of it, and was able to
Yeah.
bring those through. And not very, few providers have that, even within the VA, but he certainly did and was instrumental in just explaining PTSD and the physical effects on the brain and, the really the importance of sleep, restorative sleep, not just, you know, falling asleep or taking a nap and things like that, where your brain actually does not, enter kind of slow wavelength and actually restore itself, because most vets are operating at, that adrenaline junkie fuel, level or whatever,
Right.
and there's never any rest, and you cannot operate it at that level. For extended periods of time. It's helpful when you need it, but when you no longer need it, yeah, it's not helpful, and you literally will just wear yourself out. So anyway, he was phenomenal. There's all the physical stuff, of course, it comes from service, and that so you just layer that on top of whatever maybe mental health stuff you might have, or substance use, because that's of course our favorite way to cope,
Yeah.
is with drinking and that kind of thing. And you know but I was fortunate because I found, coming originally from Montana and growing up for a little bit of my life on a cattle ranch in Joliet and Columbus, and my grandfather really instilling the love of horses and that therapeutic value that horses bring, and knowing that, and was fortunate enough. There's a really good Reins of Hope equine therapy there in um, Ojai, California. But I also volunteered at a horse rescue up there, California Coastal Horse Rescue. They just did, I mean, great things. And I just, when I came here, I was seeking out those horse people, if you will. And that's where that Horse of Spirits Healing and a great program here close to Billings. I was just, very fortunate. And I moved from the vet center there in Ventura to the Billings Vet Center here. Very fortunate to have just an excellent counselor, therapist, whatever the case might be, who, after 25 years of service, he left us all. But, so I've got a new counselor, but after 25 years, he had definitely earned his spurs, and um, wish him all the best. But it was still was like, damn,
Yeah.
he was. But that's hey, that's life. That's the way it goes. So, but yeah, so the vet center is very helpful, as well as those kind of ancillary, or not those primary means for mental health, like the equine therapy and things like that. Art therapy, yeah, just those kinds of things.
I sympathize. It's hard when you find someone good that you really connect with. It's hard
Hmm.
when, yeah, it's hard when you want the best for them, but you're also sad.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Good luck. But yeah. Anyway, that's yeah. Yeah.
Um, so in coming back, I know you said you were pointing people in the right direction for services, but not necessarily doing it yourself. Was there anyone that you saw come back and like had really had a good experience that kind of changed the way you were looking at it for yourself?
Well, there were many people who, were going like to the Ventura Vet Center and would
Mhm.
just rave about their counselor and things like that. Um, so I knew what, I probably should be doing, was like, oh, I don't have
Yeah.
time, or, I can handle it, type of a thing. And it's interesting because I don't know how many, we helped, just a lot of Vietnam era vets, and that was another group
Yeah.
that really helped me. Was the Vietnam vets of Ventura County, just some really, really good guys. you know, Talking to them, and, listening to what they had gone through for, well, some of them for decades.
Yeah.
Or, you have a spouse in your office and you're talking about different things about what, you're going to work on as far as maybe a disability comp claim. And, the vet will say, yeah, I think I've handled things pretty good, and the wife looks at him like, what are you? Sometimes, a slap on the shoulder and a few, whatever, you son of a, you put us through hell. I mean, the kids were scared of you. We didn't know if you'd be, just all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And the vet's like, oh my gosh, because we can rationalize just about anything, over time. So, they kind of, that particular group, and then just my counselor and whatnot, and a lot of other folks, was like, yeah, it's time. And then of course, my wife, saying you need to work on some things. There was a lot of rage, um, especially when triggered, and I didn't even necessarily know. I mean, I wouldn't even necessarily feel the buildup. It was just
Yeah.
boom, and then afterwards, not during, but then afterwards, it's like, wow, that was really stupid, or that could have. I mean, we could have got hurt, or any number of things like that. And it's like, okay, it's yeah, I need to work on this. So,
And a
and
lot of
still work
times,
on it.
oh yeah. And I was gonna say a lot of times those situations come out of your control. I mean,
Yeah,
just from watching my brother, I feel like I could say that.
yeah.
I've like felt terrible when something's happened that was out of everyone's control and
Mhm.
it triggered him. So
Oh
yeah.
yeah, for sure. Well, and that's, I also knew, because I was involved in veterans treatment court there, which is kind of, it's uh, basically, vets with service-related traumatic brain injury, PTSD, things like that, who then have, DUI or maybe a DV or an assault or, something like that. Brandishing a firearm, like to brandish it. Usually it's not used in the commission of anything because
Yeah.
who knows better than a vet what actually happens if you fire it. But did that for 9 years, and um a lot of times it was not those veterans, it wasn't their second or third chance. They've had plenty of chances, but it was most definitely going to be probably their last chance before they got into an accident, and hurt themselves or killed themselves, or God forbid someone else, or a DV situation, that where there was just too much violence
Yeah.
involved, which is, I mean, just about any DV situation, there's too much violence involved, regardless of the level. But and he was able to do some amazing things because they had to get treatment. That was the whole idea of it's kind of the carrot and the stick. You get treatment, you follow the treatment plan, what the team comes up with, and I was on the team along with about 5, 6 other people. You get the treatment you need, and whatever other things that go along with that, and you can eventually have that that charge expunged or whatever the case might be. But really, the main thing is you've learned um, how to cope, certainly more positively. You've had to take responsibility too, for
Yeah.
your own actions. That, yeah, whatever occurred in the service and what you're dealing with now, that can be a mitigating factor, but it is certainly not something that would uh, it doesn't change what happened. You still have to take responsibility for it.
Right.
And Veterans Navigation Network, we've got a good guy that goes into our Veterans Treatment Court here. They call it CAMO, as well as our detention facility, largest one in Montana, and outside the prison, and really works with our veterans that are in kind of a similar situation, trying to help them out. So I saw some of the you go to one of those graduations and there's not a dry eye in the room, because what that veteran had. Well, one, you had an idea on what they went through to begin with,
Mhm.
and certainly what they had to accomplish to come out the other end of that treatment program. And it's truly remarkable. And it's kind of like, they can do it, I can do it, we can do it. No one, you may think you're out there by yourself, on an
Yeah.
island, but that's not at all the case. And I mean, the service is not one where you necessarily ask for help. That it's, it is okay to ask for that help, because you are not the only one that's going through whatever the case is. Um, and that it's okay to ask for help. It takes a lot more courage to, seek that help than to try to go through it on your own. Um, and that's what we kind of, try to convey to veterans is takes a lot of strength to
Yeah.
ask for help. Um, and because again, there's that accountability piece. Um, and yeah, we can talk about whatever happened, what you're dealing with, and try to get you, some whatever that help might look like. But whatever the resulting behaviors are, yeah, you're gonna have to take some accountability for those as well.
Yeah.
So there might be a little bit of that as well. So yeah, it's complicated. Um, but yeah, as long as you're not trying to do it alone, you're gonna work through it. And it's a shame. I don't know, I got all kinds of, I don't know if you can see them, but the
Yeah.
different bracelets. And on this one here, unfortunately, they're for surviving spouses of vets who have died by suicide in the last year and a half. That working with the surviving spouses. Um, 6, 7 of them, and these are young widows. I mean, they're like 30 years old, 33 years old, and they've got kids that are 2 years old and maybe, 6, 9 years old, stuff like that. Um, and with that vet, almost invariably, maybe there's people certainly knew that something was, the vet had issues, if you will, but they didn't
Yeah.
really know how to address those or how to ask. And usually being direct is the best way to ask. I mean, you're
Yes.
not talking to some sunflower, you're talking to a veteran. So you can ask them, you thinking about killing yourself or whatever. And because you figure for every single one of these bracelets, so you're looking at about 135 people that are impacted by that one suicide. And then when you look at a state like Montana or even Wyoming for that matter, you being in Laramie, but Alaska, we rotate one, two,
Yep.
three, um, because frankly, we like to shoot ourselves. Um, and that's got to stop. And there's a lot that goes in there. A few things we won't be able to address: elevation and the number of dark days and seasonal
Yeah.
defective and all that stuff. But there's a lot that we can do, certainly around stigma.
Yes.
Is a
Yeah.
big part. Ask for help. There are resources out there. There are people that are willing to help. Obviously, you're more challenged. I mean, Wyoming. I mean, if you look at the Rocky Mountain states, which is where that's the number one region. These are all huge states.
Yeah.
That are resource poor in a lot of areas. You've got some hubs like Billings, Montana's a hub for just about everything from Costco to sports, concerts, medical, you name it. Um, but boy, you get 100 miles outside of Billings, and
Yep.
wow, there's not a whole lot out there. And certainly same thing in Wyoming, Alaska. I mean, even more so. So, but that's where you have to rely on that network even more. And so anyway, before I go off on too much of a tangent, though, I mean, it's really, if you want to isolate, easy to do in these states, but you're not alone. So there are people out there that can help.
Yeah.
Sometimes we just have to be creative in what that help looks like, just because the distance is involved in everything else.
Yeah. I learned last year, maybe 2 years ago, about the 988, the new suicide prevention
Hmm.
hotline, and how they have that a whole separate extension for just veterans.
Hmm.
And I mean, that's telling, if anything, on how many people and the veterans are not alone in
Yeah.
needing help. And yeah, and that they need, and maybe they might want a specific type of help, or like you said, someone they can connect with.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's going, that's part of the way to helping. I'm
Yeah.
hoping anyway. Yeah, because you can text, you can call, you can go
Oh,
online.
yeah.
So I thought all of
Well,
that was great, especially for rural and frontier areas like
oh, yeah, for sure.
Montana. Yeah.
Well, and that you bring up a really good point. You were talking, rural and urban stuff. Like, there's so many places in Montana that, I mean, we'd have to have a major population explosion to get to
Yeah.
urban. I mean, we're talking frontier kind of things with the number of, or, the lack of people per square mile and things like that.
Mhm.
And, there's technology is something that we have to leverage, and telemed, may not work for everybody, but in some cases it may be all you have. And it's certainly a lot
Right.
better than others, but not if you don't have connectivity.
It's
So,
true. Yeah.
there are some things that, VNN is looking at as far as like basically vehicles and satellite, and basically meeting these vets where they're at. So, okay, maybe they don't have connectivity, but we can bring it to them, kind of a thing. I think that's been always one of the biggest issues, whether it's in California, where we had a fairly population, dense, and yet you still had people who never heard of you, kind of
Yeah.
a thing. To a place like Montana, where, okay, maybe I understand why you haven't heard of these resources, but we still need to get that word out there. And whether it's, Montana 211, where
Yes.
you can
Yep.
just, Montana211.org, go online and search for any number of things from housing to maybe elderly services or legal or whatever. Which ideally, because VNN, and it's definitely something I stress is, let's try to get ahead of these things or actually in front of
Yeah.
them. Before someone gets to the point where crisis is where they're at and maybe suicide is an option. And Montana 2-in-1, and really though, I mean, that's a great resource, but just being connected, and that's something that we try to do through our networks, is just that connection, whether it's kind of a formal, hey, it's a peer mentorship connection, or hey, it's just a fun event, we're throwing axes and eating pizza or whatever the case might be, or having a holiday party, or hey, it's an outreach event, and yes, we're helping, we're talking to you and get you, connected, but whatever it might be. It's just, making people aware. And we knew that were starting to see some successes. We started getting um, veterans were referring other veterans. And I think
Yeah.
that's the biggest thing because one, you, it kind of shows, all right, hey, there's a trust level there and you know what you're doing, but also that they're talking to each other, which is huge because that's really the only way we're going to address a lot of these things, or veterans talking to other veterans um, about whatever it might be, as opposed to the standard we'll drink about our problems, but we won't necessarily do anything very constructive to address those particular issues. So yeah, it's kind of
Yeah.
heartening when we've got vets talking and referring amongst ourselves and things like that.
You were talking a lot about spouses helping um, get help for veterans. And then also just now veterans helping veterans. I get what would you say to either a veteran who might be considering getting help or those support people who have veterans in their lives that maybe they have that inkling, like you said, some people are like, oh, I think he had issues, but we didn't really know how to approach it.
Yeah.
I guess what
Well,
advice would you give for them?
yeah, well, certainly, for the veteran, kind of like what we've been talking about, is you're not alone. Reach out. I mean, when you were in the service, you weren't alone. You were part of a unit, whatever size that
Mhm.
was, 500 or four, whatever it might have been. You weren't alone. Right? You're not alone now. So reach out to that buddy, and not necessarily get engaged, but just touch base and let them know what's going on. So that I think is the biggest thing is you're not alone. And you might be surprised. You start talking to your buddy and oh wow, you're going through the same stuff or something similar.
Mhm.
For family members, a lot of times they get frustrated because their vet's not talking to them. And I understand that. I mean, if you're deployed and whatever it is you're going through, the dark times and the light, of course, is whatever, um, is going to be back home. And you're not
Mhm.
going to mix those two. And you're not going to mix those two when you get back either. Maybe there's some moral injury or whatever. So you're thinking, well, I'm not going to talk to my family member because um, I'm ashamed they're going to judge me. All kinds of different things going
Yeah.
on, and that can make it frustrating, for the vet, but certainly for the family member as well. For that mom who, I mean, their son or daughter might be 35 years old, um, still their child,
Yeah.
and they get frustrated and won't talk or whatever, and it's so kind of helping them understand that okay, the veteran may not talk but there are still some things that you can do or that we can do, with that veteran. And maybe they get to a particular point where there is better communication. And again, that, involves, working with that vet or bringing along that family member into one of our social events, because sometimes they certainly can feel like they're in it by themselves as well. And again, that's just not the case. So
Yeah.
kind of having that, what we call our family connection, which is kind of a, you know, the family, which it could be, a spouse or child, but could be the caregiver as well, of that veteran, because it just doesn't have to be the mental health component. It could be those physical conditions where you've got that caregiver caring for their veteran or whatever, and can be a very demanding, very tough, and helping that caregiver navigate maybe VA for potential resources, whether it's, something for the veteran or housing modification or vehicle modification or what training, whatever it might be, but probably respite in a support group, most certainly,
Yeah.
because pretty soon that can become your whole life. And we want to make sure that no, there's still light outside of that. As important as it is, there's still life outside of being that caregiver to that veteran. So anyway, that's really, for the family members, is you're not in it alone either. And let us connect you with some resources to kind of help with that quality of life, both for your veteran but also for that family member as well.
Well, is there anything else that you'd like to add before we wrap up here?
Some notes. I really think, it's just there's again, it takes a lot of courage to seek help. There's people
Absolutely.
out there that are willing to give it. If you had a broken leg, you're certainly gonna, if someone could help carry you to your car and then help get you to the hospital, all right, you'd allow them to do that. If you're in a particular point of crisis, um, with some mental health or just really being overwhelmed, and you don't think that, there's any way tomorrow's going to be any better, um, you need to talk to somebody,
Yeah.
because you'd be amazed at just the level of help that is out there and the people that want to help. Um, so really last parting thing is, if I was king for a day, I would have every person in Montana take QPR, or question, persuade, refer. It's a suicide awareness prevention training. Very simple, hour and a half, depending upon the group. But really, ask that person. It doesn't have to be a veteran, really anyone,
Yeah.
and you can be direct, depending upon the individual, but ultimately it gets down to, are you going to kill yourself? Um, and then persuade, hey, you know what? Maybe we need to take a ride to the ER, or let's call 988. And if you're a
Yeah.
vet, 988, press one. But then also refer. I think a lot of people don't ask the question because they're afraid of the answer, which is understandably so, especially if it's not something you're very familiar with. But who do you refer locally that can actually help? Um, so all I'd ask is, anyone out there, if you got questions about QPR, to ask, certainly VNN, and we can help you with that, because it's a great boots on the ground, grassroots level, kind of thing that can save lives.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking your
You
time
betcha.
and doing this with me.
Mhm.
I appreciate it so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I enjoyed it. If you need anything else, you just let me know, Sarah.
Thank you.
All right. Take
All
care.
right.
Bye
You
bye.
too. Bye.